of the individual, and you have the right wanting to use political force to limit runaway market forces as they are expressed through undesirable consumer behavior on the net. And this to me seems a bit messed up. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not how it was when I went to political science studies in the early 80s. And why? I suspect it has partly to do with the fact that, and this is something John discussed again with early foresight in an essay called The Economy of Ideas back in 93, okay. Which is that property is no longer, as he has also spoken about today a lot, that property is no longer a really meaningful term in the digital domain. And the conservative idea of the rights of the individual has always been tightly linked to the concept of private property. You know, behind that white picket fence, you, the reluctant taxpayer, is in control. Well, not online you're not. So it seems to me that the right and the Scandinavian liberal model has somehow lost its initiative in the digital domain. And it would be interesting for me to hear what both John and the rest of you think about what I consider this liberal dilemma. I also thought it would be interesting to challenge John a bit on one thought 15 years on, which was, I guess, the core of this declaration of the independence of cyberspace, which was basically, as I said earlier, to tell politicians and governments to stay the hell away. Now, I guess you could say his wish has been fulfilled in one sense, because most politicians have no or very little clue about the net. I believe that if you asked a representative selection of, I'm sure we should do this, of Norwegian politicians to define the concept of net neutrality, the results would be, although highly entertaining, ultimately rather depressing. But these people are the people who pass laws and bills that profoundly affects the net. Torgeir mentioned several of them, like you know, various telecom bills and laws, the IPRED law, the EU telecom package, ACTA, and so on. And several of the founding fathers of the internet, like Windsurf, who I've interviewed about this, the guy who co-wrote TCP/IP protocols, which is basically the whole engine for the internet, and Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web. They both express a real fear that these forces could ultimately destroy the internet as we know it. The internet is not here to stay necessarily. It's just a set of rules, and if you break the rules, the net simply disappears, as it is. Now, as a founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, John has certainly done more than most to address these issues, but in the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, he writes to the politicians, you are not welcome among us, you have no sovereignty where we gather. And while it's certainly easy to agree with this in principle, I thought it might be interesting to discuss whether it's perhaps time to welcome them among us after all now, because otherwise they might, out of sheer incomprehension, turn the whole thing into cable TV. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Before we open up for questions, I want to give the panel, each one of you, a chance to comment each other if you'd like. And please keep it brief so we can also have some questions from the audience. Would you like to start, Mr. Barlow?
Well, yeah, I'll address that last question. I mean, it was not meant to be unfriendly to politicians or exclusive in any way. I was just pointing out the fact that my understanding of sovereignty is based on geography. And this doesn't have geography. I mean, I assume that you have jurisdictions, and there are things that happen within those jurisdictions that have a reasonably well-ordered way of dealing with them. Cyberspace has no borders. I mean, for all the efforts of the Chinese to make one, they've been singularly unsuccessful. If you go to China and start poking around, there's not much you can't get to. I was just stating what I consider to be a fact, not a challenge. Or certainly not, I didn't mean it to be an insult. God bless him. I mean, I would rather do a lot of things than serve in Congress.
But are you still hardcore in the sense that you, if I haven't misunderstood you completely, that you think that the net would be best served with keeping politicians as much away from it as possible?
Well, what part of the net do they have the right to legislate or control? I mean, the net is a continuous thing. It's not something that you can divide off in little pieces. It's everywhere. And I'm personally, you know, I'm not entirely ready to give any politician in America the capacity to determine what's good for the net and impose things on it architecturally or legally, unless I'm willing to convey that same right to, you know, the president of Iran and all the sheikhs in Saudi Arabia, which I think would be a bad president. I mean, the net has done an amazing job of being politically neutral. It's a way in which everybody has a chance to say what they want to say, I mean, and everybody has a right not to listen. But, you know, I don't see functional reasons. When they come up, maybe they'll come up. I see no functional reason to have governance of the net unless my desire is to save those powers that have been through the industrial period, who have no more claim to go on being powerful than the fact that they always have been. I don't get it. Now, I understand how power works. It's a self-perpetuating engine, but you know, I think we just saw something happen in the United States that was so profound, it's difficult to understand from here. But the President of the United States, which you may have noticed is quite different from the last President of the United States, was elected by the internet. And it wasn't simply that he was elected by the internet. He recognized, like every other major politician in America since the 1880s, that American politics is about two things: money, and I forget the other one. And so the system had become completely in the hands of an oligarchy that was feathering its own nest to such an extent that it's bringing down your economy practically. And your economy is pretty damn strong. It's certainly taking out most of the world economy for the next 2 years because of their capacity to do something stupid. But, you know, in America, to elect a black man president is kind of that's surprising. This would not have happened were it not for the fact that grandmothers and kids and, you know, ordinary people suddenly had the ability, because of the internet, to organize, to fund, to create huge amounts of money to get that cat elected. You know, and it was a triumph of the people in the greatest sense of the word. And the internet made it possible.
Any other comments, or should we open up for questions? I take it we'll open up for questions. Yeah, just keep your hands up, and I'll take them as I see. If I may, I'll ask a question myself first. You don't have to answer it if it's a dumb one, but do we need a constitution for the internet? I mean, in the U.S. Constitution, it starts with stating the purpose of creating a more perfect union. Can we create a more perfect cyberspace? Should I take other questions and you can think about it or forget it?
Can I answer that real quick if I can? You know, when Mitch Kapor and I started EFF, our original objective was to take the American Constitution and apply it to cyberspace. We couldn't see any good reason why it wouldn't apply there just as well. I mean, the Fourth Amendment probably applied to, you know, plundering somebody's data file. And this was still before the Soviet Union had gone down.